Will Goldstein here from thekingscourt.com. So today's video is on virtue, comparison of Stoic and Aristotelian perspectives. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to quote Jesus Christ, the golden rule. Everybody's heard the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. So that pretty much sums up in one sentence virtue, because virtue and the opposing vice is all about human relations and how we deal with others in our thoughts within ourselves, and with what we say to one another, and our actions towards one another. And so that's where virtue or vice comes into play in our human relations. So first, I'm going to just give some generalities about that. So, if you look also because it deals with human relations, you have the source, perhaps, of the action, so you have, basically what I'm saying is you have a source and you have a receiver. So you have somebody who's saying something and somebody who's listening, somebody who's done an action, somebody who's the recipient of those actions. So there's a lot of different things to consider in that, and the credibility of the source and how you react to the statements and the actions that other people do, and how you respond to also as a listener to the credibility of what you're listening to, whether you believe it or not. So these are just some basic general principles before we get into this. So I'm going to start with the Stoic perspective more. So the Stoic perspective is basically, you have the cardinal virtues, which are wisdom, justice, temperance, courage. And each one of those categories can be subdivided down into different aspects of that. The big thing about Stoics are they're pretty much steer away from emotion, so it's just kind of a very stoic in the sense that you accept whatever it is, because you can't do. If you can do something about it, then do something about it. If you can't, and that's just the way it is, then just accept it. You're kind of wasting your energy to respond to it any other way, because there's nothing you can do about it. And if you can, then do it. So basically, one of the main differences is Stoics don't have a mean like Aristotelian. So, and also they're very much perfectionists, which is, that aspect of it is a little bit similar to Christianity, in the sense that the acknowledgement that in true virtue is God, and in true virtue there's absolute perfection. And so in that sense, the Stoics sort of had it right when you look at it that way. The problem is we're not perfect, and so no, we can't. Even though we strive to be perfect, we can't live up to those expectations of absolute perfection. And so their viewpoint on is kind of absurd for humanity. It's a little bit absurd, although I do appreciate it in a lot of aspects. But in other words, you're either a sage or you're a fool. So you're either wise, or if you have some weakness, there's no degrees. That's the big thing. It's not a process oriented. You either have it or you don't. And so that's the basic format of the Stoics. And so it's kind of like the straight and narrow path, And so because of that, it's had a lot of, people have reacted to that. So in Aristotelian virtues and ethics, it's more of the golden mean. So you have kind of like a balanced center point. So it's avoiding extremes. So it avoids polarity. It's not like one stream, where you have like the Stoics, or you have absolute good and perfect, or you have evil. Okay? So there's gradations in Aristotelian virtues. So degrees of perfection. It's a process. It's a growth development, which is much more what I'm into, and it's avoiding polarities. So if you veer too much on one side or you veer too much on the other side, so the solution is somehow to find the middle. So, so some of the commentaries on the Stoic philosophy were by Cicero, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing that he believed. He basically said what I just said. It was kind of absurd that he believed there were some degrees of good and evil, and that improvement does contribute to increased happiness and spiritual growth, and that you can get better, and a decent person is going to have some ups and downs. And the idea is to reduce the vices and to increase the virtues, and accept that you're not completely perfect, and that it's life is a journey, and you're trying to improve, and rise up and try again when you fail, and don't give up. And the idea is that you're making progress. So Cicero had he's sort of in between these two. So the basic concepts for development in Cicero are self-preservation, living according to nature, what is natural, what God ordained, and be in harmony with what is natural. So make good choices in life. You always have constant opportunities to make good choices. Learn to develop good habits. And then you're living, and the consequence would be that you would be living in harmony with nature. So this is some of Cicero. So it's a path to virtue, and you practice these virtues, and you develop these disciplines. So there are things that you desire. So you have the concepts of what you desire and what is good, and what the aversion of what is bad. So you either, in choices, you either accept and do the right thing and accept it, or you refuse it when something comes along that is not, worthy of your time and your energy. So in life, you're either falling and descending and backsliding, or you're ascending. So it's a journey that's kind of like on a mountain slope, going up and down. And it's just sort of like what I've mentioned in some life. It is the ladder of ascent. That's the way the virtues are increased, and they're increased primarily through habits. So you can test your life is a constant test of how your virtue, and when situations come into your life, it's a test to see how you respond. So you have a free will to choose, but in when you're getting into more Aristotelian, there's always the concept of reflection and looking back on the choices that you made and deciding what you could have done, and look at it from a much more clear perspective, so that you can make good choices. And that's how you make progress. So in Aristotelian ethics, you have his idea is the best choice is to live well and to flourish, which he calls eudaimonia, or a happiness. So it's a process of daily going through your life and using reason and making good choices and developing good moral habits. So there's different types of virtues. I'm not going to get, one of them is knowledge, and that's just intellectual. That's based on knowledge gained, and that's not really the subject of this video, so I'm going to deal more with the virtuous mind, or the moral, and that is associated with habits. Your morals are associated with your habits, and the power of choice that you have. So you have the mean, and I think I spent a little bit of time on this before. You have the mean, and then you have the deficient, and you have the excess. For example, in courage, the mean is in the middle. And I could give a couple examples of this, but deficiency in courage would be coward, okay, or fearful and not stepping up because you're afraid. However, the excess of courage would be being rash and abandoning all caution and then suffering the consequences because you didn't stop for a moment, think about it, and not react wisely. You just went into it rashly, and now somebody's dead, maybe. So courage. So that's just one choice. I'll give one more. So you have truth. Well, there's the truth, and then the deficiency of the truth is obviously lies, but the excess of the truth might be exaggeration or flattery, you know. So other aspects when we are making choices is sensitivity. So you don't always just say the truth, the absolute truth in every situation, because maybe it might be offensive to somebody. And I could give illustrations. I'm not going to do that. But, I think it's pretty obvious that you don't always just say exactly what is. Sometimes that would be very hurtful to somebody else. So you're always sensitive of other people's emotions. So that's the appropriate, acting in an appropriate way, in harmony, and a rational way. And virtue brings honor. And, of course, vice brings dishonor. So life is a struggle, the war of the mind, a struggle to acquire wisdom, and then the constant tests of how you're doing on that journey. And life is always going to come along and give you that test. And so there are degrees of wisdom and and the more that you practice it, then the more that when these struggles come along, the more that you will be able to give thought. And if you reflect on some bad choices that you made and then decide, then maybe you might create a sort of like a game plan to how you're going to react in the future and try to make some improvements that way so that you can develop a mindset is really what he's after, a mindset, a constant awareness of appropriate responses to certain situations. So basically, the aspects in which you are virtuous are your actions, the deeds you do, and your responses, and the things that you say, the spoken word. Virtue in your mind. What are you thinking? No one else knows about, but what's floating through your mind. And the idea is that you're trying to align all those with character of good virtue. And so, if you have a vision of success, and you can kind of create a roadmap for yourself to go along the right path that leads you on the journey to where you want to go. It's kind of like you can practice. I'm a musician, so you can sort of practice virtue the same way you practice an instrument. I play a bunch of instruments. I sing, I play the guitar, play the piano, play the violin, play the mandolin, and some other things I can play as well. But, it took a lot of practice. I wrote a lot of songs, so it took practice. So you can practice the virtues. So, so one of the things that I really want to get to is practical wisdom. And that's practical intelligence, good disposition, good choices and action based on reason, choosing the good over the bad, self-awareness, mindfulness, visualization before and after in the day of the choices that you made throughout the day. He's really big on philosophical contemplation, and that's where you're really going to get the most benefit. Thinking and reflecting, critical thinking, analyzing what you have done and reflecting on it and making evaluations so that you can make better choices in the future. Virtue is associated with doing the right thing at the right time, having a positive attitude, and be creative in your thinking, produces eudaimonia, and Try to avoid making mistakes or correct them, because when you hurt somebody else's feelings, there's consequences. So rushing to reach the clock here, but thanks for listening and subscribe.